The basin looked almost gentle from a distance, a shallow white bowl tucked beneath a dark rock spine, the kind of place tired men would pick for 3 seconds of cover without realizing it had been shaped into a grave. In the daylight blizzard, the snow did not fall straight. It drove sideways in long white sheets, hissing over crusted drifts and scraping across stone. Every gust erased edges, then revealed them again. Every movement became visible at the exact wrong moment. Chief Miller lay half-twisted behind a slab of wind-burnished rock, one glove pressed against the radio handset at his ear, the other wrapped around the stock of his rifle. Static chewed through the line in bursts, then gave him nothing at all. He tried command again. Tried the bird. Tried anyone. The answer was always the same. Crackle, silence, a clipped smear of sound, then dead air. Terrain could do that sometimes in mountains. So could weather. But weather did not usually time itself with machine gun bursts. The gun on the left ridge opened again, hard and disciplined, not the wild chatter of men excited by a target, but sharp, controlled strings that stitched the lip of the basin and forced every head lower. Snow kicked up in bright little puffs. Stone spat fragments. 20 yards away, Holt, the corpsman's assistant, dragged himself from one ice-crusted pack to another with his shoulders low and his knees digging trenches. His aid bag kept snagging on the snow. He yanked it free and kept crawling because the wounded technical man near the center had started to shake from blood loss and cold at the same time. "Mag check," Rivas shouted from behind a split boulder. Nobody answered at first because nobody wanted to say the number out loud. Rivas checked for them anyway, reading the fight the way men counted weather before storm. Too many magazines already stripped. Too many controlled pairs sent uphill at brief muzzle flashes behind rock lips. Too much fire spent at bad angles against enemy shooters who had picked the ground first. Then the mortar rounds began to walk. Not direct hits. Worse in a way. The first landed beyond the basin, throwing a tower of powder and black stone into the air. The second came shorter. The third hit left. Not random. Bracketing. Someone above had eyes on the bowl and was tightening the box a little at a time. Miller looked toward the only practical exit, a narrow snow cut between 2 rock breaks on the eastern side, steep but possible if they moved fast and accepted casualties. He had already marked it twice in his head. He had already hated it twice. When the RPG hit the ledge above that cut, showering the gap with fire and shattered ice, he crossed it off for the third and last time. They built this, Rivas said. No one argued. Random contact felt messy. This felt arranged. A semi-auto rifle cracked from high right. Their rear security man, Banks, jerked once and vanished behind a drift. Not dead, Miller thought automatically. Don't say dead until you know. But Banks did not move again. "Command, this is Viper 2-1. Troops in contact. Troops in contact. Grid." Miller tried once more. The line hissed at him and went dead. The team flattened deeper into the snow. The basin seemed to shrink with every incoming round. Open country all around, yet nowhere to go. Daylight everywhere, yet visibility twisted by the blizzard into something treacherous and uncertain. They could see enough to know death owned the heights, not enough to strike back cleanly. Through the storm, the point man saw movement on the ridge. He lifted his rifle and sucked in air through clenched teeth. Another flanker, he thought. Another angle closing. This was it. The final hand coming down. A single shot cracked across the basin. It was distant, clean, almost delicate compared to the machine gun and the mortar and the shriek of round shaving stone. Then the gun on the left ridge stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. For the span of one stunned heartbeat. A silence opened in that sector, so sudden it felt unnatural, like the storm itself had been cut in half. What the hell was that? Holt breathed. Nobody answered because nobody knew. A second shot came through the white. This time the man crouched beside a radio mast above center, snapped backward, and disappeared from sight. The next mortar round landed so far offline it might as well have belonged to another fight. The rhythm was gone. The correction voice had gone with it. Miller rose just enough to look, not for the shooter, but for the effect. The effect was impossible to miss. Targets that mattered were disappearing one at a time. First the gun fixing their left flank, then the man steering the mortars. Not easy shots. Not lucky shots. Intelligent shots. Rivas stared up into the blowing snow and muttered, "No friendlies are supposed to be on that ridge." The words hung there. Not supposed to be. The shot sequence was too calm for panic fire, too informed for chance. Whoever had found that line of sight knew where to look and what to hit first. Whoever it was had either walked into the worst weather on the mountain by choice or had been there before the trap even closed. Neither answer made much sense. The enemy felt it too. Fire shifted. Men who had been pouring rounds into the basin now began searching the heights above their own positions. One burst raked uselessly across the upper ridge. Another cut through empty snow. Shouts carried in fragments on the wind, sharp and urgent. The team in the basin still was not safe. They were still pinned, still low on ammunition, still carrying wounded, still boxed by rock and snow, and a rout watched by rockets. But the fight had changed. Somewhere above them, unseen in the white glare, a single rifle had introduced a new problem into an ambush that had been running with cold precision. Miller pressed the dead radio to his ear as if stubbornness alone could wake it up, then lowered it and looked toward the heights. Whoever was up there had arrived at the exact last second, and nobody down in the basin had any idea how. That morning the mission had looked simple enough to insult experienced men. The relay station sat on a shoulder of broken alpine ground where the wind never really stopped. Snow had banked waist deep in the shaded cuts, while the exposed stone glittered under a skin of glare ice. The cloud cover flattened the daylight until distance became deceptive. Ridges looked nearer than they were. Gullies looked shallow until you stepped into them. The entire mountain seemed built to trick the eye. The order had been straightforward. Secure the remote sensor relay. Verify whether the site had been tampered with. Recover the data package if it was still intact, and exfil before the weather sealed the corridor used for extraction. Nothing about it sounded dramatic. Nothing about it sounded like the kind of task that ended with a team trapped in a white basin and a ghost firing from a ridge. The security element moved first, spreading through the relay perimeter while the technical recovery pair went to work on the equipment housing. Chief Miller handled the site with the impatience of a man who could feel the clock pressing on the back of his neck. They had weather moving in. They had limited daylight. They had a route home that only got worse the longer they delayed. Routine missions turned dangerous when routine slipped. At the edge of the element, Ash Mercer scanned the western approach and said, "Snow's wrong there." No one ignored the comment entirely. They just did what good teams sometimes did with quiet specialists. They heard it, filed it, and kept moving because bigger voices and more urgent tasks were already filling the air. "Snow's wrong everywhere up here," Rivas called back, not cruelly, just dismissive in the practical way of a man who thought the day's main threat was time. A couple of the others laughed. Mercer did not. He rarely wasted words in the field, which made the jokes come more easily. He was attached to the element as a long-range scout, useful in theory, respected on paper, but not entirely part of the loud pulse of the team. The assault personalities were easy to understand. Men who solved problems by closing distance and imposing force. Mercer solved them by noticing what had not fit. He crouched by a drift near the western slope and looked again. Wind had cut clean lines in most of the open snow, feathering the surface with a consistent direction. Here, near a stand of black rock teeth, the crust had been compacted in a pattern that did not match the surrounding scarring. Not a full track. Too old for that. More like pressure under later snowfall. Men had passed through there and understood enough to disguise it, but not enough to make the mountain forget. He looked up toward the ridge. The light was flat, colorless. For a moment he thought he saw a glint, tiny and gone at once, too brief to prove. Metal, glass, ice. Could have been anything. Could have been nothing. He kept it anyway. The relay housing stood half buried in rime and snow, its outer casing intact, but the panel fasteners showing fresh tool marks. That got everybody's attention. Sabotage usually came with smashed components, severed lines, visible damage. This looked cleaner. Someone had opened the system carefully. Not destroyed, one of the technical men said, pulling a glove off with his teeth so he could work finer switches. Touched. Miller turned. Touched how? Accessed. Maybe copied. Maybe planted something. Hard to tell yet. That changed the feel of the mission. Broken equipment meant nuisance or denial. Accessed equipment meant intent. The second technician extracted the sealed data module and checked the indicator strip. Still carrying logs. Useful logs? Miller asked. The man hesitated. Route timing. Sensor records. Traffic windows. Maybe response patterns if somebody had enough context to read it. Nobody had to explain why that mattered. A relay like this was not just a box of weathered electronics on a mountain. It was a memory of movements, signatures, routines, delays, and habits. In the right hands, it became prediction. Mercer stepped closer, studying the antenna array. When the technician powered a subsystem for verification, Mercer's earpiece gave a tiny buzz. Barely there. A wash of interference. Then it vanished. He lifted his head. Signal just got dirty. Miller was already looking at the sky. Storms building. Maybe, Mercer said. He did not push. That was part of why men underestimated him. He did not fight for attention. He logged details and moved on. But inside, an older memory had already started to unfold. Another cold operation years earlier. Another set of signs half seen. Another moment when he had waited one beat too long to force the issue because he had wanted certainty before speaking hard. Men had died in that gap. He carried their silence in the part of his mind reserved for mistakes that did not fade. The team did not know the full story. They only knew he took terrain personally, that he studied the ground like it could confess something if watched long enough. A voice behind him said, "You still babysitting the horizon?" Mercer glanced back. The horizons where the problems start. Another quick smile. Another shrug. The team was not hostile, just wired differently. They trusted action they could see. Mercer trafficked in the kind that came 5 minutes earlier, when most men still thought they had time. The technical pair packaged the recovered module. One of them, Lavin, kept it close under his outer layer, protected from cold and impact both. The mission had shifted now. They were no longer just checking a site. They were carrying something someone else had already risked touching. Miller shortened the halt. We move now. Weather closes further, bird won't come. File discipline. Spacing stays tight through the cut. Mercer looked west one last time. The compacted snow. The vanished glint. The radio hiss that came and went only when the relay powered hot. None of it proved an ambush. Together, it smelled like one. As the team formed up, Mercer let his eyes drift higher, tracing the ridge network above the intended route. Most of it was impossible for a loaded group in those conditions. Too steep, too exposed, too slow. But one line caught in his head, a nasty lateral fold hidden behind a broken shoulder of rock. Reachable only if a man cut away from the main route, climbed through a crusted chute, and accepted that for several minutes he would be alone, visible, and one slip from a long fall. Not a team route. Not under normal conditions. He memorized it anyway. Then they stepped off from the relay station, boots punching through drift and crust, a string of dark figures crossing a world so white it made shadows look blue. The recovered package moved in the middle of the file. Miller held the pace high to beat the weather. Rivas ranged left where he could. Banks kept rear security. Holt checked on the technical pair every few minutes. Less because they needed help than because he had a medic's instinct for fragile things carried by tired men. Mercer floated slightly off the main file, not disobedient, just never perfectly centered. He kept watching the western heights. The ridge still felt wrong. Too still in one direction, too empty in another. Snow moved where snow should not have moved. Wind left one pocket undisturbed and shaved another down on ice. The other saw a hard route through bad weather. Mercer saw geometry. By the time the team began descending into the basin beneath the rock spine, the sense of design had become almost physical in his chest. The bowl gathered movement. The side walls offered the illusion of cover. The eastern snow cut suggested escape, so clearly it almost advertised itself. Someone who knew the mountain and knew how trained men chose routes could have shaped a fight here before the first trigger was touched. Mercer slowed half a pace, eyes on the ridge. The team kept moving. Ahead of them, in the washed-out daylight, The trap waited with the patience of something built days before and activated in seconds. The first shot took Banks. It came from high right, a single disciplined crack that sounded smaller than the damage it did. Banks folded at the rear of the file and vanished behind a drift before anyone finished processing the direction. Then the machine gun on the left ridge opened with controlled fury and erased the rest of the team's options in one long burst. Contact left. High left. Rivas shouted, diving for rock. Miller did not echo him. He was already moving, driving the center of the file down into the basin while rounds stitched the lip behind them. Men hit the snow hard. Lavin, still carrying the relay module, slammed shoulder first in a crust and rolled behind a low break in stone. Holt dragged himself after him. Mercer hit prone and tracked high, searching for muzzle signatures through blowing white. This was no nervous trigger pull from some scattered cell, surprised by a patrol. It was initiation, a beginning signal, a door slamming shut. The machine gun on the left sealed one edge of the basin. Rifle fire from high right denied the opposite side. The middle remained just open enough to tempt movement toward the eastern cut, exactly where the rocket team would later announce itself. Miller saw it almost at once. "Kill Box," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The phrase changed the air. A firefight could still be survived by skill and aggression. A kill Box meant the ground itself had joined the enemy. He grabbed the handset. Viper 2-1, troops in contact, immediate support, grid follows. Static. He shifted frequency. Nothing. Short-range internal traffic still flickered in fragments, clipped and dirty, but long-range outbound was being strangled. Weather alone would not do that so neatly. Not right now. Not while rounds arrived on time and from arranged positions. Jammed. Mercer called from somewhere to Miller's right, or relayed denial from above. Miller heard it, understood it, and had no extra seconds to respond. A mortar round landed beyond the basin. Another came short. Lavin looked up at the sound just as the third burst left and forward, showering him with fragments. He screamed once, rolled halfway, and clamped both arms over his lower body. Holt was on him immediately. "Bit bad," Rivas shouted. "Still breathing." Holt answered, "Leg's a mess." The answer carried two meanings at once. Lavin was alive. Lavin could not move fast. The man carrying the recovered module had just become the center of a moral problem and a tactical one. They could not leave him. They could not move him easily. And the package under his outer layer was now as dangerous to possess as it was important to protect. "Smoke the west ledge," Miller ordered. One of the operators popped a smoke canister and lobbed it high. For a few seconds the wind let it billow thick and useful. Then the blizzard tore at it from the side, thinning the cover into streaks and rags. Shapes appeared behind it. Muzzle flashes stabbed through. The basin returned to deadly clarity. The team fired back with discipline because discipline was all that separated professionals from panic. Control shots, brief exposures, attempts to catch the edge of a helmet, a muzzle, a shoulder behind rock. But the enemy owned elevation and preparation both. Their shooters revealed only slivers. The SEALs lay low in bad geometry, firing uphill through weather, recoil, and glare. Then the RPG struck above the eastern cut. Flame punched out. Snow and stone erupted down into the gap. The message was unmistakable. The one route every trapped man had already chosen in his head had been anticipated before he ever reached for it. Mercer shifted, trying to read the upper center. Through the churn of white, he caught a figure near a stub of antenna and a compact mast, moving with the confidence of someone passing corrections rather than fighting for his own life. He keyed his internal comms. "Mortars are tied to a spotter near the jammer," he said. "Center ridge. If that link stays up, they'll keep shrinking the bowl." The transmission clipped. Rounds hit nearby rock. Somebody yelled for more ammo. Someone else shouted that Banks was still down. Mercer had no idea if Miller heard him. Even if he had, hearing and acting were two different things when the ground was trying to kill everyone at once. A flanking pair appeared where they should not have been, farther downslope to the right, moving fast on short skis, not yet close enough to finish the fight, but close enough to prove the perimeter was not merely pinned. It was closing. "They're wrapping us," Rivas shouted. Now Miller saw the whole shape of it. The enemy had opened with fires to lock the basin, had jamming in place to isolate the team, mortars to compress movement, rockets to deny escape, and a maneuver element pushing to collapse the remaining space. That was more than an ambush for blood. They wanted something. The relay package. Maybe a live prisoner if the fight broke right. A wounded operator on camera in a White Mountain basin would be worth more than bodies alone. Intelligence and propaganda in one transaction. The support weapon near Miller's left began to smoke at the handguard from sustained bursts. Not failure yet, but close enough to matter. Rivas did another mag check and swore under his breath. Snow glare made the enemy harder to read with each minute. Shoulders tightened. Breathing turned ragged under layers and stress. Good men started missing because conditions ate precision one detail at a time. Above all of it, the clock kept moving. Extraction had already been marginal. Weather was thickening. Sit here too long, and even survival inside the basin would turn useless if no bird could reach them or if the enemy completed the ring first. Mercer lay with his cheek against the cold stock and saw the answer with a clarity so sudden it felt almost cruel. The fight could not be won from inside the bowl. Shooting up from bad angles would only slow the loss. The ridge had to be taken from a direction the ambushers did not expect. Not by the team. By one person moving outside the box entirely. He looked once toward the hidden lateral fold he had memorized that morning. Insane route. Exposed route. Only route. He crawled toward Miller through the snow, keeping low while rounds slapped into the basin around them. "There's a ridge fold west side," he said. "Alternate climb. Hidden lateral approach. Gets above the gun line." Miller looked at him like he was speaking from another planet. In this, yes. That route's suicide." Mercer glanced at Lavin writhing under Holt's hands, at the dead comms, at the rockets owning the cut, at the mortar bursts walking closer. So is staying. A round cracked overhead. Miller ducked. Someone shouted his name. The moment for clean permission vanished into noise and white violence. Mercer did not wait for perfect command language. There was no time left for that kind of tidiness. Under cover of a fresh mortar impact and the spindrift that followed, he rolled behind a deeper rock shadow, cut left, and began to move out of the basin. No one stopped him. No one could have. Behind him, the team kept fighting and probably thought one of two things: that he had been hit or that he had broken from the line because the basin was finished. Ahead of him, the climb began under the worst weather on the mountain. Mercer stayed beneath the rock shadow as long as the terrain allowed, shoulders low, rifle hugged tight against his chest. The blowing snow masked him in pulses. 1 second he disappeared in it. The next the wind stripped the veil and left him outlined against the slope. Footing came and went beneath the powder. Sometimes his boots found crust that held. Sometimes it collapsed to his knee with a muffled crack. The mountain wanted slowness. The basin below demanded speed. He cut weight first. A pouch he could live without. Extra non-essential gear. Anything that bought him a little more movement and did not compromise the rifle. Every discarded ounce increased his vulnerability if the fight closed to arm's length, but distance would not save anyone if he never made the ridge. The incline steepened. Ice hid under powder in slick plates that turned a careful climb into a series of measured tests. Mercer checked each foothold before he trusted it. One hand on rock, one knee driving upward, breath freezing on the fabric near his mouth. Gloves stiffening where melted snow had refrozen at the seams. He kept the rifle wrapped close to protect the action from blown ice and grit. Below him, the basin flickered in broken glimpses, muzzle flashes, smoke shreds, black rock, men too small to identify. He forced himself not to look long. Emotion made people rush. Rushing got them spotted, slipped, or killed before the shot that mattered. Halfway up, he found proof that his instincts had not lied. On the lee side of a rock break, where the wind had failed to scour the surface clean, he saw boot cuts softened by new snow but still visible to the trained eye. Nearby, a ration wrapper lay trapped in a crusted seam, recent enough that the mountain had not yet buried it. A thin cable trace, dark under powder, ran toward a higher height. They own the heights. He pressed forward. A small observation post revealed itself only when he was almost inside its vision. Two figures tucked behind a stone lip, one glassing the basin below, the other turned partly downslope. Mercer froze flat against rock and snow at once, turning into shape and color and nothing more. The wind dragged white over his back. Seconds stretched. One of the men above shifted, looked through the storm, and looked away. Stillness kept Mercer alive there. Not movement, not aggression, pure refusal to exist. When the danger passed, memory tried to intrude. Another frozen slope. Another operation. Another moment long ago when he had seen signs, hesitated to harden the warning, and watched events outrun him. He had replayed that day until every missing second had become permanent architecture inside his head. It no longer arrived as grief. It arrived as instruction. Do not rush the final meters toward a firing position. Men missed because they let urgency steal their craft. Mercer eased on, using the mountain's broken shoulder to hide his last ascent. When he finally reached the upper shelf and crawled to the edge of the lateral fold, the battlefield opened beneath him in one harsh, clean revelation. Machine gun nest left, behind a crescent of black rock. Mortar spotter center near a low mast. Jammer hide, just beyond, tucked beside a compact rig, an antenna profile cut low against the ridge. Assault element forming to descend into the basin once the trap team had bled down far enough to be handled at close range. The angle felt impossible only if a man imagined the ridge as a simple crest. It was not. It folded back on itself in a staggered line, creating a hidden shelf from which the ambush positions were exposed from the side and slightly above. No one in the basin could have pictured it cleanly through snow and stress. No one on the enemy side seemed to have expected anyone to reach it in weather like this. Mercer dug in at once. A shallow, hasty hide, snow packed against rock, white fabric pulled where it could break outline, body tucked into a depression barely large enough to vanish from a casual glance. He checked the rifle, glass, breathing, calculated what he could from the wind, the angle, the visibility. More important than any single number was lane priority. Not who could be hit easiest, who mattered most. Below, a wounded voice rose faintly through the storm, raw and human enough to cut through all the layers Mercer had built inside himself over the years. He wanted to fire immediately, wanted to answer the pain with action. He did not. One premature shot would announce the hide, waste surprise, and maybe save no one. Then a new sound floated up from lower on the ridge. The buzzing whine of a compact droned somewhere below his shelf. Search capability. Maybe not airborne yet, maybe only being staged, but enough to tell him the enemy had more sophistication than the basin alone had shown. Once he fired, they would hunt. Good, he thought. Let them hunt late. He settled in behind the rifle until the world narrowed to glass, wind, breath, and sequence. The machine gun on the left. The correction man by the mortar link. The radio node near the jammer. The RPG cell over the cut. Then reassess. Then decide again. The crosshairs stopped drifting. Rescue would not come from volume. It would come from selection. Mercer's first shot took the machine gun gunner on the left ridge. There was no flourish to it. No cinematic pause in the weather. No perfect silence before the trigger break. Only a measured breath, a clean squeeze, and the immediate effect of a weapon system disappearing from the fight. The gunner folded sideways into the snow, and the hard stream pinning the basin's left edge vanished with him. Below, men who had spent the last minutes pressed into rock and white panic felt the pressure lift without understanding why. Rivas looked up, confused, then moved Lavin and Holt 6 feet deeper behind better cover before the enemy could replace the gun. Mercer was already shifting. Second target, the man by the mortar correction point. Not because he was easiest, because he was shaping the whole basin. Mercer watched for rhythm, saw the pattern in the body language, and fired just as the man leaned into the radio link. The figure snapped backward. The next mortar burst landed wild and useless beyond the far edge of the bowl. Down below, Miller heard the miss, then another. He did not know who was helping them, but he recognized logic when he saw it. Someone was cutting the fight at the joints. "Shift left by pairs," he shouted. "Don't rush. Move the wounded now." The team moved in controlled fragments rather than in one desperate surge. That mattered. Panic made ambushes lethal twice. Mercer found the visible radio node near the jammer and put a round through the operator crouched beside it. Not the rig itself, not yet. Men were quicker to disable than equipment in that weather, and chaos spread faster through bodies than through hardware. The operator toppled. A second man lunged toward the set and hesitated, suddenly unsure whether the ridge opposite him was still safe. Then Mercer went after the RPG cell above the eastern cut. They had the only emergency withdrawal path under their tube. Leave them, and the team below would still be trapped even with the machine gun silent and the mortars drifting. Mercer waited until the loader exposed his shoulder, dropped him, then held half a heartbeat and took the gunner when he rose to grab the launcher himself. In the basin, the change finally became undeniable. Fire lanes were opening not randomly, but in a sequence that made sense. Rivas saw it first. "Whoever's up there is peeling the force multipliers," he said, half to Miller, half in disbelief. Miller answered by acting on it. "Casualties deeper behind that rock. Keep the cut in sight. Nobody runs blind." Holt used the lull to get a real look at Lavin's wound. Bad. Fragments high in the leg, blood loss serious, movement possible only with help. But alive. Still alive. Holt packed, wrapped, and worked with hands that shook only when they had time to. Above them, the enemy adapted. Mercer saw the commander before he saw the reaction. One man moving with authority between positions, pointing not where frightened men pointed, but where danger actually lived. Smoke began to bloom upslope, not enough to blind the basin, aimed instead to obscure the ridge shelf where Mercer had to be. Suppressive bursts climbed toward his sector. Two climbers broke from cover, starting up the hidden side route. Lower still, the buzzing drone launched. Fast, Mercer thought. Better than average. He shifted his hide by meters, not distance enough to lose his angle, only enough to deny the next burst of memory of where he had been. Snow scraped into his sleeves. Stone bit through his outer layers. He found a new notch between rock and pack drift and acquired the drone operator before the airborne camera fully solved him. One round. The operator dropped. The drone jerked, wandered, but stayed aloft long enough to remain a problem. Now the enemy changed tactics again. Instead of relying on the standoff fires that had built the kill box, they pushed bodies around the right side of the basin. Skiers and assault fighters trying to close by proximity and finish what the shrinking geometry had begun. Close range would negate some of the mystery and force the SEALs into a more desperate contest. Mercer switched priorities without drama. Right flank leader first. He watched the group long enough to see who the others keyed off, then fired. The lead man spun and dropped. Next, the fighter carrying extra belts for a support gun that was trying to re-establish control on the move. Drop him, and the weapon behind him starved faster. Then the climber nearest the ridge shelf, because distance mattered now, and Mercer could feel the counterhunt climbing into his future. One enemy round snapped so close to his face that rock shards cut his cheek, and a fragment of stone struck the optic housing. The sight picture jumped. Not broken, but jarred. For one cold second, the entire reversal hung on a tiny mechanical uncertainty. Mercer did not curse, did not panic. He simply collapsed his method to something simpler, shorter confirmation, more basic holds, less faith in perfect glass, and more in practiced judgment. Equipment extended skill. It did not replace it. Below, a pocket of clearer internal comms flickered alive for Miller's team. Jamming did not smother everything equally all the time. Terrain and interference ebbed. Miller used the window immediately. Two-man bounds to the deeper depression. Rivas, pull security. Holt, move Lavin on my count. We're taking the cut when it opens. The enemy commander committed reserves earlier than discipline doctrine would normally favor. Men began exposing themselves in order to restore momentum. Desperation and urgency crept into a force that had, until then, looked cold and rehearsed. That told Mercer two things. First, the unseen rifle had mattered more than they wanted to admit. Second, there was someone still alive near the center of the action whose control held the whole plan together. He slowed down. Machine gunners, spotters, rocket teams, flank leaders, those were important. But command coherence was something else. You could feel it in how men moved around a particular figure, how they glanced before shifting position, how mortar timing, jamming support, and assault vectors all seemed to pulse from one location. There, near the jammer rig, a compact command figure crouched beside the setup, physically close enough to the communications gear to receive updates and issue orders without delay. He was not firing much. That alone made him suspicious. Fighters under pressure who did not shoot were often the ones orchestrating those who did. Mercer waited. The commander leaned out, pointing one arm downslope, timing another assault push while someone beside him fought with a compromised radio link. Mercer fired. The round struck with that same distant finality as the first. The command figure pitched backward into the snow beside the jammer, and for a moment nothing obvious happened at all. Then everything did. Mortar timing collapsed completely. No more coherent bracketing, only late and confused attempts. The flankers on the right hesitated at once, as if the mountain had asked them a question they could not answer. The reserve element lost its push and began searching for cues that no longer came. Fire from upper positions turned reactive and angry instead of synchronized. In the basin, Miller recognized the break. Now he roared. Smoke went out. Not for concealment that lasted, because the wind still hated them, but for seconds and confusion. Two-man bounds punched toward the eastern cut. Rivas and another operator held behind thicker rock and poured disciplined cover fire at any pursuer bold enough to rise. Holt and Miller dragged Lavin between them, boots tearing through snow, each movement costing pain and breath and precious time. Mercer covered the withdrawal the way professionals did, by ignoring dramatic targets and killing the men most likely to stop motion. A pursuer at the lip of the cut. A rifleman setting to fire down into the bottleneck. Another fighter trying to reclaim the abandoned launcher. Every shot served movement below. None existed for spectacle. The climbers reached his shelf almost at the same time. Their approach announced itself in the smallest ways first. A crunch where there should have been none. A brief shape at the edge of the fold. A breath of motion in the whiteness behind him. Mercer rolled from the hide as rounds tore through the snow bank he had just vacated. The fight collapsed from long-range geometry into a vicious, close exchange among rock, drift, and blown ice. One climber lunged over the shelf with his rifle too high. Mercer hit him low and fast, knocking the muzzle aside and firing at arm's length. The second came flatter, better trained, using the rock and the storm. Mercer dropped behind a stone lip, felt rounds punch powder over his back, then shifted around the fold he had used to enter the fight in the first place. The man followed a fraction too aggressively. Mercer met him there and ended it before the range could widen again. For 2 seconds the ridge held only wind. Then Mercer looked down. The basin was no longer a grave. It was a route. Not safe, not clean, but moving. Miller's team had punched through the cut in broken order, dragging wounded and carrying the relay package with them. Rivas remained last in the line, firing in measured bursts to discourage pursuit before peeling back. Men who had been seconds from erasure were now executing a fighting withdrawal. Mercer grabbed what he could, left what he had to, and broke contact along the backside of the shelf. The battlefield behind him dissolved into smoke shreds, white gusts, and enemy disarray. The ambush had not been annihilated. It had been broken. In mountains like these, that was enough. He caught up to the team below the next fold in the route. Rivas turned first, saw who it was, and for the first time all day had nothing ready to say. Miller stared for one hard second, as if confirming that the impossible answer to the basin's mystery had a human face after all. Then they kept moving because men still bled, weather still closed, and the mountain had not finished with them yet. By the time they reached the extraction point, the daylight had gone flatter, bleached down by cloud and storm rather than darkened by sunset. Snow still moved across the landing zone in long, slanting sheets, and the wind worried at every loose strap and flap of fabric like it wanted to strip the team back to bone. Wounded loaded first. No debate. No speeches. Lavin went up pale and half-conscious, Holt beside him with blood stiff on his gloves. Banks had not made it out. The mountain had kept him where he fell. Another man sat with his head bowed against a bandaged shoulder, eyes open but distant. Survival was present. So was cost. Mercer climbed in last. His face was grazed where stone had chipped across his cheek. Frostbite had started to bite the exposed skin around his nose and fingers. He said almost nothing. He did not need to. The others had already built the missing pieces from what they had felt in the basin and what they had seen on the route out. The man treated as useful, but peripheral, had been the reason any of them were leaving. During the first ugly phase of debrief, while medics worked and engines thumped and radios finally behaved like radios again, the recovered relay data was checked. The answer to motive came back in cold pieces. The enemy had wanted the module because it held more than surveillance logs. It held timing patterns, sensor records, route signatures, response windows, and enough identity-linked intelligence to map future movements and set better traps. With live prisoners added, they could have paired information warfare with propaganda, proof of concept with spectacle. The basin had not been chosen on a whim. The kill box had been staged days in advance. Jamming support had been planted on the ridge. The eastern cut had been pre-sighted. The plan had been to isolate, wound, seize the package, and capture at least one survivor if the team broke where trained men were most likely to break. Every sign Mercer had noticed at the relay fit now. The compacted snow, the brief signal distortion when the equipment powered hot, the glint on the ridge. The mountain had spoken all morning. Most of them had simply been too rushed to hear the grammar of it. Later, when the adrenaline had burned off enough to leave only fatigue and pain, Miller sat across from Mercer in the dim red wash of the aircraft and said quietly, "You broke protocol." Mercer looked at him. "Yes." Miller nodded once. "You also saved the team." That was all. No grand absolution. No fake argument for the sake of drama. Just the mature weight of a truth professionals understood. Clean rules mattered. Until the moment survival required someone to step outside them and accept the judgment afterward. Mercer leaned back and closed his eyes for a second. The older failure that had haunted him up the ridge had not vanished. Things like that never vanished, but no longer owned the ending. This time he had seen the sign, moved on it, and arrived before hesitation could kill in his name again. Respect came in small ways after that. A place cleared without asking. A canteen handed over. Fewer jokes. Different glances. Not worship. Something better. Recognition. No one aboard felt triumphant. There were too many bandages for triumph. Too much blood frozen into gear. Too many names being counted with care. But the silence inside the aircraft had changed. It no longer held dismissal. Outside, through the scratched window, the ridge line receded into the storm, empty again, its folds and shelves disappearing under fresh white. From a distance it looked untouched, as if no ambush had ever been built there, as if no rifle had spoken from its spine, as if the mountain had swallowed every mark that mattered. But not every mark was in the snow. Some were left in the way men looked at the one who had climbed alone into the weather when the basin became a coffin. Some were left in the knowledge that heroism often arrived without announcement, did its work in silence, and only later acquired name. And some were left in a simple truth that stayed with the survivors long after the storm buried the tracks. The mountain erased the footprints on that ridge, but it could not erase the respect earned there.